All right, we are going to have a test of our ability to be in rhythm together. So I'm going to clap a rhythm and then you repeat it after me. All ready? I love that quote. To fall in love is to fall into rhythm. So clapping together, finding a common rhythm, occasionally getting out of rhythm and laughing about it. The dance of the ages is ongoing. And we're constantly learning steps together, maybe twirling together, coming together for a moment and then breaking apart. Sometimes we pant with exhaustion at the end of any sort of dance that we do together, any sort of communal rhythm in which we live our lives. You see, it's this rhythmic love for each other that is our witness to the world that we follow Jesus, the Good Shepherd, the one who draws all people to him and expects us to do the same. And it's this love for each other that enables us to discover a common rhythm and love that becomes the dance of community. So in our gospel passage from John, Jesus says he has come so that his sheep, his followers, all of us, may have life and have it abundantly. Right? Most of us think, yeah, life is pretty good, it's desirable, it's pretty important. But how much so then is abundant life? The chance to not simply persist, but thrive. Not to simply exist day to day, but to flourish. And not to only dance, but to dance well. To have a sense of meaning, of purpose, of fulfillment. To know and be known. To accept and to be accepted. And I believe that there's one thing that pretty much everyone across the board desires. And that's this kind of life that is meaningful and rich. And more than that, I believe that all of us regularly make all kinds of sacrifices in the hope to earn or achieve or purchase this kind of life. And each time we fail, it kills us a little bit on the inside. Now, in case you're not sure about all this, I'd like us to take a look for a moment at the changing nature of advertising and our culture. Evidence of how keenly we seek a sense of fulfillment and purpose that is abundant life, often from the things that we buy or the events that we attend. So it's pretty easy to look back over history and quickly track the shift in advertisement from making promises about brand quality to making promises about quality of life. A certain kind of life. They actually have a name for this shift. They call it emotional branding. And it seeks to fill those empty places in our lives that civic institutions like schools and churches and fraternal orders and bowling leagues, that all of those things used to fill. And when we're honest with ourselves, we can take note that while the things that we purchase, the shows that we watch, the celebrities maybe that we strive to emulate, while they may be perfectly useful or even fulfilling, I mean, there is nothing like a brand new laptop computer or a new pair of really good running shoes that just feel awesome, or the high that you get when you go to a great show or a concert, or even that good feeling you have, you know, when you look in the mirror in the morning and you think, not bad. really provide the abundant life of meaning and purpose that we seek way deep down. But here society finds itself, seeking meaning and fulfillment, maybe even abundant life, from things, in part because it's perceived that one can no longer find that kind of fulfillment in church. So what can we do to change that perception? Well, first, I think that we all need to reclaim the responsibility to name how often it is that we have been cheated, or maybe even as knowing participants to some extent in the charade, perhaps those ways that we've actually cheated ourselves by settling for something less than abundant life. And that's not because we're bad people or that we're a lost cause. It just simply never hurts for us to take an honest look at the choices that we've made, the strategies that we've employed, the things that we have relied upon to bring us authentic, abundant life, and ask whether or not they are truly satisfying. Because the fact of the matter is that after all of our seeking and searching and shopping, most of us still end up far short of the abundant life that Jesus promises us. And perhaps it's just because we don't know how to achieve that kind of a life. And of course, maybe even naming it an achievement is part of the problem. Maybe we're afraid of what it takes to receive that kind of living. Why is that? I suspect that authentic, abundant life, which Jesus here describes as flowing from relationship with Jesus and then through him with God, demands that we are more vulnerable than most of us are prepared to be. You see, so much of our life is about protecting ourselves, giving the impression that we really do have it all together, and in this way guarding ourselves against vulnerability. The difficulty with that, though, is that we cannot experience abundant life without exposing, even lifting up, those very vulnerabilities that we want to hide. For the truth of the matter is, as Brené Brown has said in her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, we cannot go selectively numb. And in trying to protect ourselves from hurt and disappointment, we have so numbed ourselves that we have cut ourselves off from the opportunity to really feel alive. So think about it. So much of our life is caught up in this double bind of wanting intimacy and honesty in all of our relationships with each other as much as with God, and yet simultaneously holding back and not risking ourselves and exposing ourselves fully to others for fear that they may reject us. And that's a legitimate fear, isn't it? I mean, most of us have had some time in our life where people have rejected us for who we've allowed ourselves to be. And so we sort of cover ourselves in emotional armor, living half-truths, sometimes even outright lies about who we are, hoping to protect ourselves from hurt, perhaps all the while knowing that as long as we are not honest about who we are, we cannot trust the love and acceptance that others would offer us. When we draw the curve, we don't trust that others will fill that in and come and walk next to us. Because we think, would they accept us, truly accept us, if they really knew who we are? And it's that very real condition and dilemma that God embraces in the incarnation, taking on our lot and our life in the flesh and blood of Jesus. This man, born of woman, born under the law, the one who experienced love and laughter and sorrow and disappointment, this teacher of love and peace who was executed on the cross, this one knows the deepest recesses of all of our fears and insecurities, and has embraced all of them. And then when he is resurrected, he comes bearing the peace he has offered all along, accompanied with the promise that his love is greater than any of our fears, and that his new life is greater than death. And so then he invites us into his dance, to be his partner, and he's willing to show us the rhythm of that abundant life. Which means that the second thing that we need to do is to declare his promise and accept his invitation to dance. And friends, that is a promise. You see, abundant life is not something that we earn or achieve or buy or barter for. It's a gift. The sheer gift of God who loves us enough to lay down his life for us. There are so many thieves and bandits in the world who would rob us of life, who would cheat us of abundance with things that they say are so important but really aren't. And a lot of times we believe those. So Jesus comes as this gatekeeper, this good shepherd to show us what abundant life really looks like. And he is one who knows his sheep intimately and truly, and who calls us by name, so that hearing the difficult truth about ourselves, we may believe and receive that wonderful truth about God's great and victorious love for us. You know, there are two really great themes in the Gospel of John. The first is the theme that Christ is the fullness of revelation of God. And Christ reveals all the time that he is the revealer of God. If you see God, if you see me, you've seen God. And second, that John not only reveals himself, but he commands us, all of us who believe in him, to love one another. Or in other words, Jesus not only teaches us how to dance, this dance of abundant life, he actually commands us to share that dance, that partnership, that sense of dignity and identity and rightness that comes when we get the steps right and fall into rhythm with others. As we read and study early Christianity, we recognize that those two themes, the dance of God's revelation through Jesus and the dance of love for one another, help to shape the identity of John's relatively small church as they are being battered by the world around them. This is a community, John says, that should do two things very well. They should reveal Christ to the world, and they should show love for one another. But the writer of this epistle is concerned that both of these things, the church members, that in both of those things, the church members that he is leading, they're falling away from the truths with which they began. And they're losing this wonderful rhythm of their dance together as a community that loves deeply and loves well. So 1 John 3:16 again recalls John's gospel and that great text where Jesus sets the command to love one another in the even greater context of his own love for us. When he says, I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. Here's this communal love for a brother and sister placed in the context of the redemptive love that Christ shows for all of humankind on the cross. And 1 John makes this same connection between our love for each other and Christ's love for us. We know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. Now, we're all good for that, right? I mean, we know Jesus went to the cross because he loved us so much. But it doesn't stop there. It continues. And we ought to lay down our lives for one another. That's really deep. That's huge. And it's in those words that we glimpse the depth of the gift and the gravity of the demand that Christ has for our lives. Christ is unconditional love for us, even to the point of death. And he demands our unconditional love for each other, even to the point of death. And the preacher who writes this epistle tries to show what love to the point of death might mean. Not really at the extreme points of sacrifice, because very few of us are ever going to be at the point where we give up our life, our actual life for each other. But what does it look like in the daily give and take of the loving life? And concretely, he says, such love begins with charity. And he writes, how does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister in need and refuses to help? Even in the midst of great economic difficulty, most Americans have more of the world's goods than most of the world can even begin to imagine. And at its most painful end, Christian love requires giving up of our lives, but in a way less sacrificial, but still surprisingly painful way. Christian love requires giving up some of the goods that we think we need when we come up against someone who is truly needy. I've discovered that at Desert Skies, this truly is a lifestyle. And many of us here have been blessed as a result of deep sharing and caring. Living this kind of love means living out what we say, and it happens day after day in this place and in the ways that we as a community outreach to the world. And the truisms abide because there's truth in them. So we hear things like practice what you preach, or walk the walk, don't just talk the talk, sermons in shoes, or John's words, little children, let us love. Not in words and speech, but in truth and action. And we discover that there is more and more need in the world every single day. And we will always be hearing about more ways that we can help, and new dances that are emerging, and new partnerships that are forming, and new rhythms that are calling us to clap along. This week, many of us know, if we've been listening to the news at all, many of the wonderful teachers that are here in our state of Arizona and in our own community are fighting for a lifestyle that simply allows for them to provide the basic necessities of life for their families. Our children in our communities are important, and their education is critical. So I invite us all into a week and longer of prayer and support for all of our teachers and educational staff as they discern ways forward to create the schools that will be good for our children.
Amen.
We, even as a church, may be called on to provide a space for children in our community at the end of this week, and I pray that our hearts and minds and spirits might be open to receiving a call and to come and help should that be necessary. For as we dance and partner with our community, Jesus reminds us that abundant life is experienced right here, right now, as we're willing to practice those things that we talk about, those scriptures that we read together. Because the promise of John's gospel is lived out each and every day in communities that treasure his words. And those very words are part of our mission statement here at Desert Skies. You see them on our banner in front of the church every single week, that we love one another in caring community. And we love one another as we catch the beat, and as we dance together, and as we pick up the rhythms that all of us are being called into as a faith community. For we learn that to fall in love is to fall into rhythm. Let's fall well.